it's Amanda here, and today we're talking about a new palette from ColourPop. It has been a hot minute since they launched a new palette. This is a 9-pan palette. It's called So Elemental. This one's launching on Thursday, March 21st at 10 a.m. Pacific time. This one should be priced at $14 US, just like all their other 9-pan palettes. But I do have an affiliate code. It's just my first name, Amanda, and that will save you 10% on most things on the ColourPop site. Certain collaboration items are excluded. All of the sets, vaults, bundles, and of course anything that's already a sale item will be excluded. But this new So Elemental palette should be eligible for coupon codes. If you decide to pick this up, you can use the code Amanda to save 10%. And I genuinely really appreciate anybody who does take the time to use my affiliate code. It really helps keep the channel running, and I just appreciate it. I have a lot to show you with this. Of course, we're going to take a close-up look at the palette. I'm also going to show you finger and brush swatches of this one. I have a bunch of comparisons, and I also have an eyeshadow tutorial, so you'll get to see this close-up, swatched, compared, and in action today. Let's start by just taking a look at this palette and the packaging, and then we'll move on to the swatches. This palette has the same cover art on both the outer carton and the palette itself. This is a cardboard palette with a magnetic closure. As you can see, as usual, the ingredients list is just on the outer carton, and then the shade names are pictured on the back of both. When we look inside the palette, there is no mirror in this one. These eyeshadow pans are the larger size pans, so similar to ones that you would find in the Of Quartz, All Amethyst, Feeling Bubbly palettes, and larger pan size than what you get in the classic 9 pans like Blue Moon, which we'll talk about later, or Lilac-U-Lot. I think you know what I mean. This palette has 3 true mattes, 1 matte with glitter, and then the very center shade is one of their pearlescent glitters, so sort of the new version of the pressed glitter that just has a really, really fine grain glitter, and then the remaining 4 shades are just classic metallic shimmers. Now let's take a look at the finger and brush swatches. As usual, the finger swatches are on top, the brush swatches are below. These are all done with a dry brush on completely bare skin. There's no primer, I don't dampen the brush, none of that. In general, I would say this palette is lighter overall. I think we have about 2 mid-tone shades and 2 deeper shades, but in general, this palette is very light and bright, which makes sense given that it seems to have a water type of inspiration. The front half of the palette has largely cool-toned and blue-based grays and silvers, and then the second half of the palette we see more of those very true blue type of colors. I think Malibu Waves, Calm Down, and Out of the Blue are the most definitively blue shades, while the others seem to just have more of a blue tint to them. But you can decide for yourself. I think that these are more blue-based grays and silvers, but they do read very blue on the eye, particularly when paired with those stronger blue shades. And that's sort of what I did here. I tried to create a very, very blue look, but I didn't shy away from using those grays and silvers as well. Performance-wise, I would say this is middle of the pack for me. It's definitely not a bad ColourPop performance, but it's also not my best, not really blowing me away formula-wise. I will say I ended up wearing this eyeshadow all day long. It was quite warm. I was running around a lot. I had a lot of errands and unexpected here and there that I had to do. So I ended up wearing this eyeshadow for well over 8 hours, and it was so-so. I mean, I was sweating, like drips of sweat on my face. So I did see some loss of coverage, not totally abnormal for me. I mean, I do have a lot of lid overlap that happens, and I was wearing sunglasses, and like I said, it was hot, it was humid, I was sweating, I was running around. So I would say this was a medium performance from a ColourPop palette for me. Given what I put my makeup through, I would say my face definitely impressed me more than my eyeshadow, but the eyeshadow lasted a lot better than I expected. When I got home from my crazy day, I thought this is going to be completely disappeared and all fallen out all over my face, and it truly wasn't too terrible. So medium impressed with the performance. I did notice that some of these really light grays are a little bit difficult to blend, but again, that's a normal thing that I have experienced with this type of shade across the board from different brands, not just from ColourPop. I do want to try some more looks with this palette and see if I can do something softer. I was so drawn towards this jewel toned out of the blue shade that I immediately went for something that was more intensive. So I'd like to try to do some lighter looks and see what the performance is like there. And I also think that this palette would create a beautiful gray and silver look and then do that pop of blue eyeliner on the waterline and maybe a really strong blue shade on the lower lid. I think that would be a fun way to just experiment with this palette. And you know, when I review stuff, I try to use it a bunch of times during the month before I do my monthly ranking. So I'm gonna have to try to squeeze in a couple more looks with this So Elemental palette if I can. And who knows, my opinion could change for better or for worse after a couple more wears with this one. Right now, I'd say we're in like a B minus type of rating, which truly isn't terrible, but it's also not knocking my socks off. I'm not prone to love a very blue palette anyway, so I would say for me, that B minus rating for a very blue palette is actually pretty good. You got to think about the bell curve on this one. Okay, now you've seen the palette in action, you've seen it close up, you've seen the swatches. It's time for everybody's favorite part. Well, maybe not everybody's favorite part, but definitely my favorite part. We're gonna get into some palette comparisons here. The very first palette that came to mind for me was this Baroque palette. It has that similar sensibility of a lot of cool toned, neutrally grays with a little hint of blue. So Elemental is actually a lot more blue than Baroque ever was. And I think Baroque is just in general more neutral and a lot darker. On the flip side of that, we have the Cloud 9 palette, which was the second palette that came immediately to mind. These are a lot more similar, but again, I think So Elemental looks a lot more blue in comparison to Cloud 9 versus putting it up against something that is very intensely saturated blue, like the Blue Moon palette. In order to do a decent comparison for Blue Moon, I did pair it with the Troublemaker palette to bring in just a little bit of those silvers and grays that Blue Moon truly lacks. But even the Blue Moon shades included here, you can tell, are just a lot more primary and saturated compared to So Elemental. The Blue Moon palette is definitely more of a companion, a cousin, but definitely not a twin. Now, this is a shockingly close comparison, at least in my opinion. This Twilight palette is very close on several accounts. I think just those first two lighter gray shades in So Elemental are really lacking. Maybe, the first couple of shades are a little bit off, but in general, I think you could get a lot of the same eye looks out of these two palettes, and same goes for the Aurora Struck palette. This is another one of my favorites, and these aren't exactly the same, but I think if you blended, mixed and matched, and created some eye looks, you could get a pretty similar vibe. So Elemental is a little bit softer, maybe has more of a pastel feeling to it versus Aurora Struck. And this Ghost Town USA palette from Nomad Cosmetics, one of my favorites again, has a couple of similar shades, really lacking that shimmery jewel toned blue sapphire shade on the end there, which I think is the draw for the So Elemental palette. It really seems to be the standout. That's maybe my own personal preference speaking. But surprisingly, we get a very good, not quite dupe from these two Fantasy Cosmetica palettes. If you combine Wizard and Fighter, you can get a very, very similar color story to this So Elemental palette. So if you're just looking for a dark blue shimmer, I recommend the Graviturgy shadow from Fantasy Cosmetica. I don't think this palette is as blue as it looks. I think the packaging kind of tricks you into thinking that it's more blue than it is. However, I will say this is not as much of an offender in that department as the Cloud9 palette and the Baroque palette. Those both suffered from that blue packaging syndrome, but the palettes themselves had little to no actual blue shades. This is a lot bluer than Baroque and Cloud9, but nowhere near as in-your-face blue as something like the Blue Moon palette. This is sort of in between. I think it makes a lot of sense. Cool tones are very popular right now, and personally, I have been more drawn towards cool tones over the past, I'd say, 2 years. I love a silver eyeshadow. I just did a favorite silver eyeshadows video not too long ago, and this has some really beautiful silvers in it. I really, really like this dark blue shimmer. It's very much like the one in the Twilight palette. I'm just drawn towards jewel tone. Overall, I really like this one. I think it's a smart palette. It's a nice little addition to the 9-pan line. And I think this is perfect for somebody like me who wants to like blue but doesn't want a full in-your-face bright blue palette. The cool tones and the silvers really help me just ease into the blues here. I quite like this one. I think a lot of people are gonna like it, but I would love to hear what you think about the So Elemental palette. Are you interested? Are you satisfied enough if you have any of the comparison palettes? I always love to know what you think about things too, so make sure you leave all your thoughts down in the comments below. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye! All the sets, but okay, okay, okay. I'm kind of a blue girl now. Cool to I did select my nail polish to match this particular shade. Did I do crazy eyes just now? Bye! It's fine, I'm fine, everything's fine. All right, that's my time, people. I am so thirsty. I'm gonna drink a gallon of water. I think it's because I had really salty food for lunch. That always makes me so thirsty. Okay. Um, Thanks for watching. I always appreciate you taking the time to come hang out with me. That's so cool that you did that. I always love to see your beautiful face, and I also love your beautiful face, and I will see you in another video again real soon. Okay, bye.